Hello, in this video I'm going to go over a deep dive of the Sorcerer, much like I did in the first video with the Dragon Knight. We're going to go over the Sorcerer class here for skill analyzation and if you're wanting to use it in subclassing or not. So let's get into it. The Sorcerer identity essentially is a physical damage class, a shock damage class, and a little bit of magic as well in some areas. Because the Sorcerer has the ability to proc 3 different status effects because they can do those damage types. One of them is Concussion from Shock, Sundered status from Physical, and then Overcharged from magic damage. In addition to this, the specific passive buffs certain types of damage to provide key bonuses. The Amplitude passive buffs physical and shock damage, while the Expert Mage passively increases weapon damage for each sorcerer ability that you have slotted on your bar. So let's get right into it. The champion points from the war tree that you're going to want to focus on in most cases for the sorcerer, you're going to always want to run a parse on your build and review the battle scrolls add-on from your parse to determine what your specific build setup is running. I know I have had a lot of surprises when I have done parses, and there has been a lot of enlightenment for me personally using the Battle Scrolls add-on to find out what type of CP that you need to slot on your build in order to empower it the most. The Master at Arms slottable buffs direct damage. Deadly Aim buffs single target, and so that's predominantly what is present on this toolkit. That's not to say it's the only thing. There are damage over time skills present, but that's what is the large amount of the damage that's on the toolkit. So what you're going to want to do is analyze what skill lines you're using. If you're going to be a pure sorcerer, then you don't really need to look at anything else outside of what you've got to work with, other than if you're a Magicka or Stamina sorcerer, then you'll need to decide what morphs going into whatnot. But for subclassing, we're going to do an analysis of the dark magic skill line. And so I'll just be upfront about it. I really think this is one of the worst skill lines in the game in its current state, and it is probably in the need of an overhaul in the more than any other skill line. This is pretty much a total mess, in my opinion. It's trying to achieve a couple of different things at the same time, and it doesn't really excel at anything. And so let's get into it. The in-class spammable Crystal Fragments lives here, although this is overall a PvP and at a bit of a stretch, a healer skill line. Um, really, neither role is achieved well in subclassing world. This skill line is virtually never selected, making it a skill line that most is in need of a complete overhaul. So let's just analyze the ultimate. Negate magic is the base. I'm not going to read these entirely because that'll just make the video extremely long if I do that. But essentially, we're going to analyze the 2 morphs. The absorption morph also heals you and your allies inside of it, and then the suppression field does damage to the enemies inside of it. So let's just analyze the healing part of it. This does not even come close to competing what you can get from Barrier. There's a Barrier morph that heals your allies while giving you a shield, and then you also get a Magicka Aid passive that increases your Magicka recoveries by 10% just for slotting it. Pardon me. And then the suppression field damages enemies, but there again, the damage that this does is not very much. It doesn't equate to nearly anything else in the game in terms of damage wise. The silencing that this does on enemies and players, that the players part is really where this is kind of tilting towards PvP. Most of the enemies that you're wanting to put this on are elite, and elite ads cannot be stunned, and so they can't be snared or stunned. So this really doesn't do anything for elite ads. So it's just really not a real great idea to use this outside of PvP, in my opinion. So Crystal Shards. This is the spammable for the Sorcerer class, and it is not living inside the DPS skill line. It is up here in the goofy skill line of Dark Magic. They could rework this to have it do shock damage and call it something else, and then slide it down into the Storm Calling skill line, and then you'd have a more complete skill line with that. But the Crystal Frags Magicka morph is basically the Magicka spammable that does magic damage, and you can have it increase in damage when you are casting non-ultimate abilities to make it charge up, essentially. And then the stamina morph is more prominent on tank builds because it strips 1,000 armor, and it costs stamina in order to do that. So you could use it on stamina builds, but this is probably not going to be used as much on a build that's using Velothi, because this basically increases your damage that you do with light attacks and heavy attacks. So maybe a little bit more common on a heavy attack build, or a build that's not using Velothi, but that's the analysis there. So the next skill in the Dark Magic skill line is called Encase. This one really is probably one of the best skills, or I should say the best skill in the skill line, because it has the most utility. It is basically an area of effect skill. Tanks can use the Shattered Spines version to immobilize enemies, as well as applying Major Maim in an AoE, which is a quite rare debuff that you can apply in an AoE. Another way to get that is from the Void Bash Sword and Board set from Vadistran Hollows, or you can put it on a scribing skill, but most skills, or excuse me, most sources of obtaining Major Maim are typically single target. So the fact that this hits in an 18-meter radius and applies Major Maim to an unlimited amount of targets on the Shattered Spines makes this a great skill to use if you're tanking. However, the small caveat to that is, or maybe a large caveat, uh, if you're using Dark Magic, I don't really know who you are. This skill line is just not used. Subclassing is alive and well in the game, and I literally don't know who would choose to start off on a sorcerer as a tank and then keep this as their native class skill line. You're probably 99.999% of the time going to choose to keep uh, either Storm Calling or the Daedric Summoning skill line over this one. So really, again, this is kind of at the mercy of being stuck in a crappy skill line. The other one, if you're a sorcerer healer, again, this is really the only skill in the skill line that would be useful. So I really have a hard time trying to use this skill and skill line on even a subclassed sorcerer healer. So perhaps they'll continue to rework the classes, and they'll analyze this and make this skill line much better. We'll see, but I can't remember when the sorcerer is in line for an adjustment. But in my opinion, they should have been first up to bat rather than the Dragon Knight. I think the sorcerer is in a much worse place than the Dragon Knight was. At least the Dragon Knight had uh, the number one tanking spot for a while. Sorcerer has been in a big hurting way in terms of PvE, I'm talking about. So anybody that's gonna jump in comments and say, "Oh, it's god tier in PvP," I'm not talking about PvP in this analysis. I'm talking about PvE, as you can see from the recommendation here in the yellow print. So the Vibrant Shard is a good source of an AoE major main, but it also will heal your allies and then give your allies minor vitality for 10 seconds, which is a nice buff to be able to give. Not a super rare buff to give anymore. For example, the monster set Ozazon the Infernal will provide minor vitality for a brief period of time if you actually heal your target. But this will give your group minor vitality for 10 seconds. There is a large cost of magicka here on this skill. So I've used this in before subclassing was active in the game, and I had a sorcerer healer that was just a pure class sorcerer healer, and I did use this in place of combat prayer because I just wanted to try something a little bit different in some situations. Minor Berserk and Minor Resolve are pretty common with Arcanist healing, so I wanted to try this out and provide minor vitality to see if that was helpful, and that was really the only time I ever used this. Ever since subclassing has been out, I have not really touched this skill at all, to be honest. We'll see what happens when they implement the class masteries to see if this becomes a thing or not, but I'm not real optimistic at this point. The next skill, Rune Prison. This is purely pretty much a PvP skill. And let me just put this in airplane mode so that doesn't happen anymore. The defensive rune, it could be used for solo builds. However, you're really just going to want to use this skill in PvP. I'm not sure how useful this rune protection would be in a solo environment. I've not really been on a build where I've tried to use this, but it's essentially just a stun if somebody touches you. It kind of mimics the Living Dark skill from the Templar skill in that it gives you kind of a protective ward, and then if somebody attacks you, then it stuns rather than doing damage back. So there's a little bit of a similar action there. The Rune Cage deals damage instead of the stun, and so there's the difference in the two morphs there. They both cost the same amount of magicka. Um, the one difference is the defensive rune goes on yourself. The Rune Cage, you aim it at your target and it stuns them. So the problem with this is if you're thinking, well, I could use that on a tank. Well, it's a single target enemy skill. It only hits one enemy. That's the problem. If you're on the Dragon Knight tank, for example, and you're going to use Talons, it grabs several enemies. You don't want just one. You want to grab several. So that's the problem with this skill. It's only a single target. So anyway, the other really good skill in the skill line is the in-class Burst Heal, or one of them, I should say. If you count the Matriarch, then that would be another one, I suppose. This one has the ability to convert to stamina or magicka based on which one you want to use. They essentially do the same thing. They both give minor berserk. The other one just gives stamina, and the other one gives magicka, depending on which build you want to do. So for example, the dark conversion costs stamina and it returns magicka. So you're going to want to use this on magicka builds so that you can obtain magicka back in the amount here. So, and then this right here, Dark Deal, if you are on a full bore, or say a full blooded sorcerer, you're going to want to use Dark Deal because, or I should say a full blooded sorcerer tank. This costs magicka and is a resource of getting stamina back. The Minor Berserk is really not that unique. You pretty much can get that in a lot of different areas, so I wouldn't recommend keeping the skill line just for this reason. Um, Again, there's just not enough here to force people to use this skill line. Daedric Mind, the last skill in the line, this one really needs to get reworked quite a bit. There's two morphs, Daedric Refuge, which could be considered a support or tank skill, I suppose. This provides protective wards that lie on the ground, and then your allies have to walk into them in order to obtain the shield. One of the biggest problems with this is it's extremely expensive to cast, costing 5,400 magicka, as you can see. And then there's an added on mechanic of your allies have to actually walk into it rather than it just adding the shield to them. Um, Really, there's just a lot of easier ways to give your allies a damage shield. For example, the Arcanist uh, Chakram shields is basically just goes right on your allies. It doesn't, you don't even have to aim it. It just flies on them. This right here is a really bad mechanic. And then the other one, the Daedric Tomb, you put this on the ground and somebody walks in it and it explodes. So you place the mines at the target's location so you can aim this one, and then they arm instantly, and then it does magic damage. So I guess if you're wanting a delayed burst kind of thing, um, maybe in a duel or a PvP situation, this is a good thing to look at. But for PvE, I would not recommend either one of these. Biggest reason is it's really expensive for what it really does. You get a no really uh, benefit from it. So the passives for dark magic, you get a reduction in your cost of your non-core combat abilities by 6%. That can help with some sustain issues, or if you're trying to move around. But the blood magic skill line passive here gives you a heal every time. If you're not at full health, this ability scales off your max health. So this is a tank passive, basically. When you see this right here, it scales off your max health. That's meant to help tanks, but once again, there's not a whole lot of stuff in here that would help tanks. And then if you're at full health, then you get a increase of your maximum magicka and stamina, only for 10 seconds though. So I mean, it's really, there's a lot of jumping through hoops with this skill line. It really needs a lot of work. And then after blocking, your next ability costs 18% less. Again, a tanking passive. And then when you cast a dark magic ability, you provide your group Minor Prophecy for 20 seconds. The problem with this is that the counter buff to this is Minor Savagery, which comes from the Assassination skill line and Nightblade. Um, that's going to be so present in your group already that this is basically worthless. And so that just caps on even more why you should not touch the dark magic skill line as of right now. If they do some changes and improvements in the future, then all for it. But as of right now, I wouldn't touch it. So next up is the Daedric Summoning skill line. This is primarily good for pet builds and some tank builds, depending on what you're on. If you're going to stay a sorcerer, full-blown sorcerer, then there are some elements in here that could help depending on what you need for your build. Um, tanking on a sorcerer and then subclassing into other things. The Daedric Summoning might be a very common one for you to keep. I would say it's probably the one that you want to keep based on the ultimate that is there, as well as the passives and whatnot. It also has a very strong shield. So let's get into it. The Storm Atronach. This used to be the exclusive way to provide your group with Major Berserk by allowing them to hit the synergy to obtain Major Berserk for 10 seconds. That is not really as unique of a buff anymore. The Dragon Knight rework is going to have a class mastery called Lead from the Front, where they can activate an ultimate with 500 ultimate, and they will be able to give your entire group Major Berserk for 33 seconds. So because that is now going to be present in the game, that kind of steals a little bit of thunder from this Atronach, so to speak, pun intended. But the better morph in, I would say, most cases is probably the Summon Charge Atronach. And the reason why is it hits in AoE and it has an always applies concussion status effect, whereas the other Greater Storm Atronach morph is more of a single target damage um, uh, ultimate. They both cost the same. They both have the same range. And the Summon Charged Atronach is more AoE and it has a bigger radius for that. The Greater Storm Atronach is really easy to decide or determine which one it is because you'll see one shock tether basically coming out off and then it's aiming at one enemy, whereas the Summon Charge Atronach kind of slams the ground and you'll see a lot of different lightning hitting in the area. So it's really easy to determine which morph is being used. If you're in a group and you see this one here, you might want to advise them to use the other one. This is a much better morph for PvE, Dungeons and Trials especially. You're going to want to use the Summon Charged Atronach. Don't use Greater anymore. This used to be the one to choose from, but because they've increased the amount that status effects do, this is the one you want to pick by far. So the next up is the familiar, the little scamp pet. This one, if you're not on a pet build, I would recommend that you don't use this. The problem is, if you're on a 2-bar build, this you have to double bar so that it doesn't die when you bar swap. If you're on an Oaken Soul build, then you're choosing to slot either a heal with the Unstable Clan Fear or a familiar with this morph. Um, I'll just say this doesn't do a whole lot of damage comparative to some other stuff that you can put out there. You can just summon the pet and it will do passive damage with this shock damage here, but it is not as potent, I'll say, as some of the other skills that you could put on your bar. And if you're using this on an Oaken Soul build, this is probably one of the reasons why you're not getting a whole lot of cleave damage. This does have some AoE, but it's just not very strong. It's very small amount of damage comparative to what some other stuff does. So just keep that in mind. I know that there are still a lot of pet builds out there, but and if you're going to build into that, by far, this will be the one to choose from over the healing morph. This one here is mainly used on tank builds, but again, the problem is you're going to have to double bar this in order to keep the scamp out. So just keep that in mind. The next one up is Daedric Curse. This has two different functions. You can either buff your pet damage with the Daedric Prey, or you can apply a debuff that lasts a little bit longer. It's called Haunting Curse, and it will explode 2 times instead of the 1. This is more of a PvP morph. Not to say that you can't use it in PvE, but it's much more common in PvP. And this is more of the pet build morph because it's going to increase the damage that your Daedric pets do. Um, and the other thing is this will also buff Maw the Infernal. So that's why this is usually used on pet builds because it will increase the damage that your familiar does, as well as some other things outside of the sorcerer skill line, such as Maw the Infernal. So moving on, the Winged Twilight. 2 basic morphs here. 99% of the time you're going to want to use the Matriarch because the damage difference that you get from the Tormentor is really not that much compared to what you get from the Matriarch just coming out passively hitting shock damage. The real appeal here for this being used is the heal that you can get. You can heal 2 extra targets with this, including yourself. So you can really help keep your team alive. For example, if you're running a team of 3 DPS and 1 tank, you can use this on your build to kind of almost quasi act like a healer because the burst heal on here is so strong. Um, it is a little bit costly, so you can't really spam it a whole lot. You definitely want to be on a Magicka build for this. If you're going to use this one, you do have to double bar this one as well. The difference is the Tormentor does extra damage while the enemy is above 50% health. And so the reason why this is not a good selection outside of parsing is because once the enemy drops below 50% health, you don't get any added benefit here. It's just going to do the shock damage here, and it's just not enough. Again, it's not enough to have on your bar to passively do just this. So the benefit of this one up here is it can give you a good burst heal. So just keep that in mind as well. Conjured Ward is up next. This is the in-class shield. Really easy to determine which the 2 morphs here to use. This is primarily used on tanks, Hardened Ward. It has a massive shield, one of the biggest shields in the game. It's capped at 72% of your max health. It does cost quite a bit, so there is that problem. Uh, but it absorbs a massive amount of damage that scales on your max health. So this can be a really, really huge shield, really good for solo play. And then if you need to shield your pets that you're using, this will shield those as well. The regenerative ward morph is more of a support shield because it gives you a shield. It's not quite as large. It's capped at 55%, but what it does is it costs less, as you can see. It's about 600 magicka less per cast, but then you also grant your allies minor intellect and minor endurance. So that can be a helpful buff in group if you need it. Not extremely hard to get those, so just make sure you're checking your group makeup and make sure that this is not redundant. Otherwise, you may be able to get this, for example, from a scribed skill that does more than just shielding. Maybe it heals as well. Just look into that. So bound armor. This is a really unique skill. It's one of those skills you could just slot on your bar and you get a benefit on your bar regardless of what bar you're on. The tank morph, or what used to be the Magicka build morph, Bound Aegis, this no longer gives you an increased max Magicka. It just passively gives you minor resolve and minor protection. The base morph gives you minor protection. So if you're on a tank build and you need the extra armor to just passively be there, it's really nice to have that along with the minor protection. But the biggest benefit of this skill for tanking is the fact that you can activate this for 4050 and you can get a massive amount of block mitigation. So this is a really helpful skill if you're sorcerer tanking. This can really help you get through some tough stuff. You can just activate this and block a ton of damage. The other morph, Bound Armaments, is primarily used on a stamina sorcerer. You could use it on a Magicka build. It's not, against the rules or anything. It just costs stamina, so you have to be mindful of your resources there and make sure that you can handle casting this when you need to, as you can possibly have this activate quite a bit. This will give you major prophecy and savagery on either bar uh, instead of the minor resolve. So that's the difference there. And it does not have the block mitigation. Instead, it tags on a light and heavy attack element that will do physical damage right here. And so this gives your power to your light attacks and heavy attacks. So again, if you're using the Velothi mythic, maybe don't use this. This is really not going to function well with the Velothi mythic, because that reduces your damage of that quite a bit. So I wouldn't coordinate this on a Velothi mythic build. Use something else. And so the passives for the Daedric Summoning, you get Rebate, which restores magicka or stamina when one of your non-ultimate Daedric summoning abilities end. And then you've got the Power Stone, which reduces the cost of your ultimate. This right here is one of the biggest reasons why this skill line is chosen, is because of this reduction right here. This works on every ultimate in the game, not just sorcerer ultimates. So you can make everything in the game 15% cheaper. Really, really good. And if you're on an Imperial, 6% on top of this. So that would be 21 if you're on an Imperial tank. So that's a really good reduction there. That's from the Red Diamond passive, if you're curious about that. Daedric Protection. This reduces your damage taken by 5% while you have a Daedric Summoning ability active. So if you're activating the block mitigation or the shield, then this will kick in as well. And then you have Increased Summoner. This increases your magicka and stamina by 5%. And then if you have a permanent pet active, then you also get extra health. So this would require a tank to run the healing morph of the clan fair in order to take advantage of this part. I'm not so sure that's worth it just to get 5% health. Eating up two skill slots just for that, I'm not so sure that's worth it. But that's my opinion. So Storm Calling. This right here is the #1 skill line for Sorcerer. This is the king for the skill line. Uh, Storm Calling is, in my opinion, one of the most effective skill lines for solo building. Based on the buffs that it gives, you could get a Major Resolve skill that provides uh, minor expedition while it is active, and it does damage. And then you have a source of major brutality and sorcery from the Surge skill that also heals you quite a bit. Uh, so those are two absolutely excellent things. It also buffs physical and shock damage. And then for every skill that you stack on your build, you get extra weapon and spell damage as well. And a lot of their passives on here are pure passives. They're not, you have to slot everything outside of the weapon damage one. So let's get into it. Overload. This is primarily kind of a parsing ultimate. I wouldn't recommend this too much for actual dungeons or trials. In some cases, if you're on a light attack build like a traditional stamina sorcerer, then this is a really great one to pick. But again, if you're on a Velothi build, that's just the mechanic of buffing your light attack damage. It just is counterintuitive. If you're on a Velothi build, you don't want to use this because you're not really kind of supposed to light attack anyway. So it's just kind of a build synergy thing of paying attention to what you're running. Um, you don't want to run bound armaments with crystal weapon and then this too on a Velothi build, because you're gutting your damage and then you're trying to add it back in, and it doesn't gel together well. So really conditional on when you use this. Just pay attention to which morph you're choosing. One morph gives you resources back uh, and doing damage. The other one does more damage. And so that's basically the big difference here. This increases your damage. This gives your damage to your light attacks and heavy attacks, while also providing you resources back. So it just depends on which one you need to use or want to use, but that's the big difference here. This one will give you resources. This is purely just full on damage. And this is kind of a unique ultimate, I should say, because you can toggle it on and off. While it's toggled on, your light attacks uh, get the benefit of it, and then when you toggle it off, it stops consuming ultimate. And so it's a very unique ultimate in the game. There's not really a whole lot of other mechanics like that in the game. The meter distance here is really far. You can really hit somebody from far away with this. So just keep that in mind. It's predominantly a PvP situation, or if you're parsing, but that's where I'm going to leave that. Mage's Fury. This is the in-class execute, and basically how I like to explain this to people is this right here, Mage's Wrath, will hit more enemies in the area harder, but it costs more. And so this is more difficult to sustain on stamina builds. That's not to say that you can't use it. The problem is it's just going to be harder to hit this over and over in the execute phase if that lasts a long time, because it does cost more. Endless Fury, this will refund you quite a bit of magicka here. If you see, this refunds more than twice what this costs. So if you kill something, you're going to get this refunded, and it'll be a lot easier to sustain on stamina builds. And so that's why I call that out. Um, there is a difference in cost here. They both cost magicka. Unfortunately, they didn't do that yet, so maybe that's something they'll consider is changing this to a stamina morph of some kind. Maybe it does physical damage instead of shock. Who knows? Um, but basically, this hits harder in an AoE on your enemies that are around your target, and then this will refund if you hit something and it dies. It'll refund magicka. So those are the big differences there. So lightning form. This is the ground AoE, or pardon me. This is the major resolve skill. I'm getting ahead of myself. Um, Hurricane is the stamina morph. This is predominantly the best one to use, and it is your source of major resolve in the toolkit. This will also give you minor expedition while it is active, and so you get a speed boost, some damage in the form of a physical damage over time, and a whirlwind around you. Basically makes you look like Pigpen from the Peanuts gallery. And then it costs stamina to activate. This is a better, more damaging morph. I would recommend this on pretty much all DPS builds, including solo, magicka, and stamina. This is the better morph for all cases. This should be pretty easy to sustain regardless, because it lasts for 20 seconds. That's not a huge cost to reactivate. It's always good to kind of mix in both stamina and magicka on your builds. That way you're not draining yourself on one. So I would say Hurricane is your DPS one. Boundless Storm is more of a tank morph, in my opinion, because it costs magicka and it lasts 30 seconds instead of 20. The radius is the same. However, this does shock damage instead of physical damage. And then you get the major resolve buff for 30 seconds. And instead of having minor expedition for the entirety, you get major expedition for only 4 seconds, though. So this is kind of a oh shit, I got to move out of the way real quick, pop this on, and it'll give you a really quick 30% increase movement speed for 4 seconds. So that's why I say this is a tank morph, is because it's a really good tool for getting up and out of the way, while giving you a major resolve buff for a long time for a fairly cheap cost. So Lightning Splash, this is what I was trying to say before. This is the ground AoE in the skill line. This puts a lightning rod on the ground and it hits in a 8-meter radius if you're using the flood morph, or it uses a 6-meter radius if you're using liquid lightning. The difference in these two, lightning flood increases the radius and the damage, so you get 8 meters instead of 6, and then it does 415 on the base versus 309. So I will tell you 99.999% of the time you're going to want to go with this one. The only possible time I would say maybe you want to do Liquid Lightning is maybe if you're using this on a beam build, subclass beam build, and you're wanting to make the skill last a little bit longer so that it doesn't have to be managed as much. That could be about the only thing I can think of that would make this the morph of choice. The unique part about this skill is both morphs, they have a synergy that you yourself can activate, the conduit synergy, or an ally can do it. And so this has a damage over time element here and a direct damage element here. So this skill has the possibility of being buffed by both Master at Arms for this and Thaumaturge for this. So that's a very unique situation on that skill. But if you need a source of lightning AoE, this is a really good skill, but I will say it's maybe not as strong as some, but it is nice to have that synergy in group. So Surge, this one is absolutely S tier for solo builds. Critical Surge, highly, highly recommended for solo builds. It's a good source of major brutality and sorcery. It lasts for 33 seconds. That's a really long time for a skill. It's a little bit expensive magicka wise, so you might want to be careful leaning into magicka too hard if you're going to use this. But the healing that this can give you is really, really strong. You just want to make sure that you have a lot of critical chance on your build so that this will trigger, and it can heal you for quite a bit. This is really surprising how much this will heal you for. So next up is the other morph, Power Surge. This is mainly a healer skill morph to choose because it will heal your allies instead of just you. This Critical Surge is a selfish skill. It only heals you, whereas the Power Surge can heal your allies. So in the amount of 25-50 when your critical heal strikes, basically. So if you're critically healing, you want to have your crit chance up again. So, and then this will tag on even more heals, and this can happen once every 3 seconds. So sorcerer healing on a storm calling build, that could really, this is, if you're going to be a crit healer, this is definitely one you want to look at. So Bolt Escape, this is kind of the, there's two different morphs here. One of them is purely a PvP skill line or skill morph, in my opinion, with outside of a small niche situation of if you're going to run the Monolith of Storms set from the Infinite Archive, then you can use Streak to apply one of the monoliths because this will do damage with the Storm Calling skill that will activate one of the rods. The Ball of Lightning morph is more of a tank skill that is used for moving around. It will remove snares and immobilizations from you, so that can be nice right there. And it also has an interrupt of projectiles, so it can be more expensive if you cast it within 4 seconds on either morph. So you got to really be mindful of not to just spam this, otherwise you're going to be out of resources really, really quickly. So getting into the storm calling passives, as I said in the first part of this skill line overview, a lot of really good passives that are true passives, increasing your magicka and stamina and health recovery by 141. That's a true passive. There's no requirement or for slotting anything here. Increasing your physical and shock damage, again, a true passive. And then this increases your damage done against enemies by 1% for every 10% of their current health they have. So essentially, this is a reverse execute. So the first 100 to 90% of their life bar, you get an extra 10% to start. And then when you take 1% down, then it's 9, and then so on and so forth. So that first 10% before your bloodthirsty trait jewelry kicks in, this gives you a little bit more damage until that kicks in. And so Expert Mage, the last passive here, is conditional on slotting sorcerer abilities, not just storm calling, but sorcerer abilities. And then you get 108 weapon and spell damage when you do that. So this is the only portion of the passives for storm calling that requires you to eat up some bar space. A little bit nice, not great. I'll say this is kind of underwhelming in my opinion, comparative to what some of the other class passives are for Nightblade or Templar or whatnot. I think this one needs a second look. So let's get into the class mastery of what they're talking about giving the sorcerer to try and entice people to remain a pure blood sorcerer. So the conservation of energy, this passive upgrades your blood magic to also activate off of an ability with a cost, excluding a cost per tick ability, and it restores more resources basically. So the blood magic passive is in the dark magic skill line. So if you're not using a whole lot of stuff from there, this might not be real great. Again, before I go any further, if you're not familiar with these, you have to remain a full-blooded sorcerer without subclassing, and then you get to choose at least 2 of these to use. So just keep that in mind. Font of Power. This passive upgrades your exploitation passive. That is the dark magic passive that grants minor prophecy, and it activates on any sorcerer ability rather than just a dark magic skill. So that frees up the ability to have to use something from dark magic in order to proc that. So that's kind of nice. And it also grants you 1% weapon and spell damage for every 1750 stamina. And I did some math on this earlier. I believe that works out to about 18%. So this is max stamina that you have. So you're going to want to lean into max stats really hard if you're wanting to use the Font of Power. So this is a really powerful skill or passive here. Not sure if it'll be enough to entice people to not be a full-blooded sorcerer. That remains to be seen. We'll have to see what happens when they go live, what it looks like. But that one right there is definitely a DPS class mastery that you're going to want to look at. Static Reverberation. This harkens to an ancient passive, Implosion. The passive causes your damaging attacks to have 1% chance for every missing health to trigger an additional hit of shock damage. So basically a percentage chance for every missing health. So as your target gets lower and lower on health, it should be more and more firing this, I guess. And so that could be another help for damaging. So you're going to really want to lean into shock damage. We'll see what happens there. Maybe look into buffing shock damage with the Lich set from, I believe that's from Dark Shade Caverns. Might be a thing, who knows. Calculated Defense. This passive causes you to gain a damage shield that absorbs 30% of your max health anytime you begin activating a sorcerer ability with a cast time. So this is going to help you if you're going to try and sorcerer tank and use the Dark Exchange that has a cast time on it. And then if the shield breaks, it grants you and your group members 3% weapon and spell damage for 20 seconds. So this is definitely a tanking passive here. You're probably not going to have this happen a whole lot on our DPS, this shield breaking part. If you're on in a trial or a dungeon with a real tank, then this is definitely a tanking passive here. And then we have Sphere of Influence. The passive causes your damage shield abilities to grant an additional damage shield to the target that absorbs up to 15% of their health. and it scales with the higher of their max magicka or health. So this will help with healers and tanks. And then also they gain recoveries for 4 seconds. So I'm not seeing a whole lot here that is going to entice people other than maybe this. For these two here definitely are the Font of Power and Static Reverberation are definitely looking like the DPS ones. Really interested to see how that works. But again, you're going to want to lean into max stats and then look at buffing shock damage on that type of setup. So in a subclassing, what they offer, I would say if you're in PvE, don't even touch this in most cases. It's not recommended in its current state. We'll see what happens when the sorcerer gets a makeover, but not really a great skill line in it what it is right now. Daedric Summoning, if you're on a pet build or a tank build, this is a decent choice here. Oakensork builds can't really compete in dungeon and trial environments, and so I would recommend trying not to do that anymore. The cleave damage that you can get on a beam build is just seriously outweighs the damage that you can do on an Oakensork build. There's just not enough cleave. So on a subclassed build for pet builds, those can add in a lot more AoE damage, but that's not usually running Oaken Soul. There's just not enough bar space for that usually on a 1 bar. For me anyway, I've done a pet build before, and this was used basically to get the pets out there, and then I had to use the rest of the bar for other pets from other skill lines. But on a 1 bar pet build, probably not going to do real well. So I would say this is probably predominantly a tank skill line for the benefit of the reduced ultimate with the summoned Atronach. Storm Calling, again, S tier for solo builds and pretty much the DPS skill line of choice to keep if you're on a native sorcerer. Then you're going to definitely want to keep this as a DPS, maybe even a healer. Who knows? I'm not sure. I don't sorcerer heal that much anymore. I haven't done it for quite a while. So this may be only a DPS skill line and a solo skill line, but this is a really good one for those categories. And so I'm going to end the video here. If you thought this was helpful or interesting, please consider liking and subscribing to my YouTube channel, and I will see you in another video. Thank you and have a good day.